So I'm going to give everybody once again my, and I'm going to, just a second here. I want to see the, I'm just, before we get going, if everybody wouldn't mind at the end, we'll just take questions at the end because that's going to be a bit easier because it's really hard for me to chat and do the presentation at the same time. So if people can wait or even just put on your mic and just stop me for a minute, that would work too. Okay, so let's begin. So no, that is not where we're beginning from. Okay, sorry. We're supposed to be beginning from here and play from the current slide. That was my mistake. Okay, there we go. So now we're going to talk about root canopies, rhizosphere, and results. So this is an example. Now, yeah, I know that Christine Jones and a number of people talk about the dreadlocks, like seeing a really thick rhizosphere around the roots. You don't always see that. I need to sort of tell people that. Sometimes in wetter soils, you won't see it. You see a little bit of it here. On some of these fine roots, you'll see a little bit of it closer to the surface, but not where we've actually sort of pulled them out. So it all depends on how you've extracted your roots. In a wetter system, in a wetter time, you might not see, in wetter soils, you might not even see the dreadlocks at all. So, don't always use that as a measure of what you're doing. So this gives you an example of, what is the rhizosphere. We have plants, organisms, soils, and, all together, they form the rhizosphere. And there is no separation here, folks. I mean, we can't really separate one from the other. The plants and the organisms and the soils are all moved together. The plants the plant roots will influence soil structure. That will change the microorganisms and the community surrounding roots. The plants themselves will change it depending on what they need. So let's say they're short of phosphorus, they'll start pulsing out acids, organic acids, into the rhizosphere, which will change some of the organisms, and some of the organisms will perhaps even release some phosphorus into the plant area. So, it all changes. And then there's one big change that happens next, and we're going to talk about that a lot, is that most of the plants that we're growing in the heartland are actually very mycorrhizal. I mean, our tallgrass prairie doesn't exist without mycorrhizal fungi. And so we're going to talk a little bit about how they influence all of this, because they actually influence the whole thing. So when you have mycorrhizal fungi colonizing a root, they actually form what's called a mycorrhizosphere. So all the hyphae, which are these silk threads that sort of move into the soil, they actually will bind more soil because of the glomalin that's exuded from them, this glue. So they create more soil structure themselves, but they really change the physiology of the plant. So the plant starts pushing more nutrients, or more, especially organic acids and amino acids, down into the root zone. This also changes the composition of the bacteria and the fungi associated with the mycorrhizosphere. The mycorrhiza themselves definitely promote more plant growth promoting rhizobacteria, because they need their host to grow and thrive. If it doesn't, then they don't. So they're going to do their best to make sure that happens. And then you can see that the mycorrhizosphere extends far out from where the normal root would. So it's always preferable. So mycorrhizal fungi increase the rate of photosynthesis because they are going to rely on amino acids, organic acids, and neutral carbohydrates from the plant. So they need to increase the rate of photosynthesis. So they do that through providing more mineral nutrition to the plant and more water to the plant, so it can maintain photosynthesis. And they're trading, so they are the original carbon traders for sure. This is a beautiful fluorescent micrograph from Chris Nichols. And you can see here's the root, and you can see these are actually reproductive structures or spores from the mycorrhizal fungi that are actually growing on the outside of the root. And these will be, you know, another root grows near them, they'll colonize the next root. So this is what they look like when they're not being fluoresced. And you can see they're all different shapes and sizes. Some of them come more in this pod-like form. But this is the kind of thing that we'd see if we were actually sieving for mycorrhizal spores. And you can see that they're very glossy because they actually have a lot of lipids in them, so a lot of fat. Water resistant. You can see the soil particles that are actually glued to the root through the mycorrhizosphere, and that is the mycorrhizosphere. That glowing halo is the extent to which the root has the mycorrhizosphere itself has extended. And now you can see it the way it is, the same root, but only in light as opposed to fluorescence. And same thing, you can see how the fungi are holding these aggregates together. And really, I mean, it's again, the glue from the mycorrhizal fungi, it's really quite beautiful. So let's look at the corn, like corn plants. Now, corn is very mycorrhizal, high on the list of mycorrhizas. This is dwarf corn, and here we have what we call normal maize. You can see with mycorrhiza and without mycorrhiza on both sides. But I want you to notice, it's really noticeable in the dwarf corn. You can see, and I can't get my pointer back here. Here it is. You can see how much darker it is, the darker green color. If you wear Polaroid lenses in the field, like Polaroid sunglasses, you actually can differentiate the shades of green. And greener plants, so plants that are greener, but particularly on that blue-green spectrum, they tend to be have more vitamin C. They tend to have a little bit more boron. So you can actually tell from the color and from the calcium. So you can actually tell from the color what's going on there. Now this is mycorrhizal fungi actually mine. They actually do will do a mining exercise. And you can see here that that these roots are actually going into this old piece of, in this case, this is actually an alfalfa root. And you can see them actually mining this. Now, one of the other things you notice here is this yellow color. See how these roots here are really yellow, and you can see them up here? This is a legume root that's gone into this. And one thing people always ask me and say, well, how can I see mycorrhiza? You can't actually. You need to stain them, clear them, and stain them, and it's a way to actually, you know, visualize them under the microscope. But this yellow color is also mycorrhizas again. So mycorrhizal fungi can actually form this yellow color, which allows us to see them on the outsides of the root. And you can actually see this yellow color on most plants. Will form it when they have mycorrhizal fungi. Now, it's very light sensitive. So the idea is that you just kind of clean off the root really quickly and expose it and have a look, and you'll see the yellow color. And you know, it's worth having a look at it. It's and checking for it, because once you start to notice it, you will see it all the time. And it's canary yellow, canary yellow. There it is there. Now in this experiment, we've actually been baiting mycorrhizal, we've actually been looking for mycorrhizal fungi to see what the colonization rate is. And so these are onions. Onions are very mycorrhizal. They have long straight roots, so if you pull them out, you can see them fairly easily. They wash off easily, and you can see the yellow color here. Over here, you can see a little bit there, a little bit here as well. We actually have a way of evaluating colonization where you put these roots on a gridded surface and then take a picture, and an app will actually tell you the percentage of mycorrhizal fungi based on the color change. And this, you can see it up. This is our control. It's very hard to get non-mycorrhizal plants. So we have a little bit of color here, but you can really see how the color, that's the plant is making that color. We don't really know why, but it's in response to the colonization by the fungi. But yeah, you get this really bright yellow color. And it is ubiquitous. You see it around the world. You see it in almost all plants that form mycorrhizal fungi. Later on in the season, it's very hard to see because they're colonized by, the roots are colonized by so many other things. But, you know, it is something that you can look for. In this case, we see, in this slide, you can see these are the plants that are highly dependent on mycorrhizal fungi. This is low dependency. They'll form mycorrhiza, but they don't really need them. And wheat is a good example of that. Oats and barley tend to be more reliant on mycorrhiza, and oats in particular form beautiful mycorrhizal associations. These are non-hosts, but we're not going to worry about them. We're always going to add them in, even though they don't build the mycorrhiza, because they feed our soil microarthropods. Soil microarthropods, earthworms, all animals in the soil love brassicas. They love them. They are just Red Bull to them. If you need to build up your earthworm populations, having canola, mustards, any kind of brassicas as a crop, or as a higher percentage of your cover crop mix or in your intercropping system, that will just totally really build up your earthworm populations. So plant species differ in their abilities to acquire nutrients. Some of that is actually based on mycorrhiza. Some of it is just normally the plants. So plants actually, you know, people talk about needing to feed the plants. Well, actually the plants are very happy to feed themselves. If they can't get enough phosphorus, they will exude acids in order to mobilize phosphorus. If they need sulfur, they will do the same thing. They have chelators to grab iron and manganese and zinc. Siderophores also will do the same thing. Again, just grabbing onto things. And mycorrhizas will help as well. So it's really a combination of all of those things I've mentioned and even more. Plants are not just in the ground stationary and not doing anything or just defending. They're actually proactive in trying to get the mineral nutrients that they need to grow. And diversity is the key. Plants have more biochemical diversity than animals. Part of that's probably because they also have to be proactive and defensive because they can't move anywhere. They have a lot of defense mechanisms, and they produce a lot of really interesting chemical compounds to fight off diseases and insect pests. For example, if an aphid lands on a plant, just lands on a plant, it will send off a signal, ethylene and jasmonic acid, so that every other plant in the vicinity knows that an aphid has landed. If the aphid actually bores a hole, then there is a more intensified signal that says, armor up, everyone, they're here, and start sending off signals for ladybugs and predator insects to come in and start feeding. So plants are by no means sitting there passively. Monoculture farming, really, we're set up to fail because we don't have this diversity of chemicals that can fight things. So we have to add the chemicals ourselves, whereas normally a plant would have much of the arsenal that it needs in order to fight. And And, you know, and like I said, plants then have no offense and they're always on the defense. And we need to find that balance. And we can do that by making sure plants have what they need at the beginning of the season. Now, let me say something a bit more about that. Seed quality is really, really important. So for example, a wheat plant, a germinated wheat plant can live on the resources in the seed, as long as it's high seed quality, for 12 days before it actually, and that gives it enough time to form a really beautiful root system and have enough photosynthetic capacity to really start growing. And it's at that time that it needs to hit all the goodies, so that it's not really just taking everything out of the seed. And the last thing we want to do is create an environment as well with the seed, where the seed itself has to give up resources in order to neutralize some of the things that we've done to it. So that's the other thing we don't want to ever do, is actually create an environment where the seed actually has to give things up in order to neutralize the environment. So with that, every different seed you put in the ground, every different one creates its own unique community, and has its own unique properties. This is work done in the 70s by Dr. John Pate in Australia. And what it shows, this is root exudates from these plants. And it's the percentage of nitrogens that are in the plant roots. And so this is essentially a nitrogen signature of root, for roots. So oat roots, the reason that they compete so well is because they actually, like corn, have a lot of nitrates. So they actually will use nitrates. But they'll also produce amino acids and amides. The thing that gets interesting is when we get into the legumes here. Legumes are really interesting because, of course, they produce their own nitrogen, but they also produce a lot of ureides, which are very complex nitrogen compounds, which stay in the soil a lot longer. So which means that we are going to feed off them and they're going to break down more slowly. So we're going to have a slow release nitrogen, if you want to call it that. They don't have a lot of nitrate in their roots, so they're not really a nitrate user, with the exception of white clover. And that's, again, if we want to use this chart if we are thinking about companions or intercropping, because the last thing we want to do necessarily would be, or maybe we do because we're going to put a lot of nitrates in the ground, is put corn with white clover, because they're going to share the same nitrogen profile. I mean, in fact, it looks very, very similar. So maybe they're going to get along better. That's one of the things to look at it that way. Or if you're going to put white clover, you might want to mix it with some of these, because it's not going to do the same. It's not going to use the same pool of nitrogen. So it's a way of looking at it. Lupins, although they fix nitrogen, they fix it in a very different way from other legumes. And you can see that they really do. They're very good nitrogen fixers, a lot of amides, a lot of amino acids. Something else that we can look at, definitely as a crop or something to grow in between the rows. Very powerful at releasing phosphorus. These are the root exudates themselves. This is the pH. So you can see here, faba beans are creating a very acid pH. Soybeans, not so much. They sit right in that middle range, that 5 to 5.5 range, and even get into the 6 on the perimeter. Whereas corn is very much on that neutral side. So imagine combining your faba bean as a companion crop with your corn, and look at that. You're going to hit more of this 6-5 area, which is going to be really good for root growth. Everybody says, well, you need to be in that 6-5 range. That's good, but we also want to be releasing phosphorus. We want to be releasing calcium. We want the sulfurs and whatnot, which we're going to get if we hit the middle zone. This is actually water droplets off the end. So this is actually, with this as being a wash, and you can actually see root exudates coming off these roots. Water and root exudates. And plants will actually give up some of their water to actually have the soil attached to their roots so that they can actually function a lot better. So they function better when they're more attached into the soil system. So what is intercropping? Well, it's very old. We did it a long time ago. A lot of ancient cultures, China probably the longest, has been growing things together in order to support one another to make it easier to harvest. Also for benefit of pests and diseases. In this case, we have buckwheat and winter triticale, and sometimes they out yield each other. So even though we have only half of the amount of seed of triticale and half the amount of seed of buckwheat, they yielded more than they would if we'd had a full field. This is something we don't always understand, but we know that plants have a lot of synergy between them. And when we pick well, we actually out yield. So, like I said, historically speaking, we've done a lot of this. In the 1800s, we were underseeding a lot. Clover mixed in with corn. In Illinois, they knew that if you added clover into your corn, you got an increase, a yield increase. We knew that if we had mixed forages and legume crops before a wheat crop, and this is at a time when we weren't have any fertilizer, that we also got a yield bump. So we've known about these things, but when we had fertilizer, we just kind of ignored it because we could just add it. We didn't need to think about these interactions. But these interactions aren't just about nutrition, and it's not just about yield. It's also about water holding capacity, efficiency of nutrient release, and it's about managing diseases and pests, something that we could do a better job of probably. So compounds that are released by roots when they're intercropping. So what's really interesting is that the plants will actually work together, and some of them will actually stimulate the other plant to do things that they normally wouldn't do. So like a chickpea and wheat intercrop, and I've done this quite a lot. Actually, the chickpea feeds the wheat plant beautifully. Nitrogen as well as phosphorus. As long as I provide the sulfur, we're all good. And we can grow 15% protein wheat and yield the same as the average or even a little better with only 20 pounds of nitrogen through the growing season when we are using this mix. So there are a lot of opportunities to be using some of these mix, and they do work. I mean, we don't have to wait for the legume to break down in order to get an advantage. Phosphorus is another one of those things. Phosphorus is, we think of it as more of something we need to add all the time, but it's really rich in the organic matter. And when we actually do these deep profiles, we actually find phosphorus much deeper in the profile. And if we can get deep roots in there, we can pull it up and actually release it into the sort of more of what we call the rooting zone in that sort of top foot of soil. We can reach down, pull it up, leave it in there, and we don't have to use as much phosphorus. So once again, we need to think about this a little differently. So flax and chickpeas growing together, they love each other. And if you're going to try something and you can grow, you're in an area where you can grow flax and chickpeas, it's the no-brainer one. We know that they grow really well together. Alternate rows, we've really come to the conclusion that alternate rows probably work best. Yeah, it's an extra pass, but it actually does. Both plants tend to work really well. This is an out yielding situation where you always get, at least 10% more, if not 20% more yield off of both the chickpeas and the flax when you grow them together. And you can see those together. Now, does everybody notice the yellow roots in there? Mycorrhiza. Actually, when I took this photo originally, I didn't really notice that. And but now you can really see it. So remember that the roots are touching each other and they're sharing. So that's the beauty of this, is that the chickpea roots are sharing with the flax roots. or in this case, the vet roots are sharing as well. So works really nicely. The other thing about this is when you have monoculture, this is your water use. This is courtesy of green cover seed. And this is your water use, the drawdown. Same time, this is just soybeans. And then look at this mix, 12 species. The drawdown is different. Part of this is because the ground is shaded. Part of this is because some are more efficient at getting water than others. Some of them have deeper roots, sharing water with the other plants. We just don't have the same water use in mixes that we do in monocultures. Another reason why to do intercropping or at least underseed. The other thing is that broadleaves and broadleaves, forbs, dicots, whatever you want to call them, they have a different cation exchange capacity, which is twice that of grasses, cereals. They tend to take up more of your divalent cations and anions, whereas your grasses tend to be more monovalent. So again, we can use this to our advantage. So when we're growing corn, always put a broadleaf with it because it's going to get some other nutrients that it wouldn't normally get. In this case, this is corn intercropped with pigeon peas. Pigeon peas are beautiful. They have a beautiful deep root system, as you can see there. And you can see them growing between the corn row. Weeding, not a problem. It's a beautiful thing. It really is. We really like it a lot. And again, this is more about, I just want to show people that there's real science behind this. This isn't just, you know, a bunch of farmers that have gone ahead and done relay cropping and intercropping. And yeah, we see beautiful results from it, but there's real science behind it. It works. We know it works. We know that the roots share, and we have the evidence for it. And it's the same thing. We've seen it in wheat, we've seen it in barley, we've seen it in oats. This is Jim Robb's farm in Danville, Kansas, and he's growing canola and peas together, or piola, and no herbicides. He grew them in cross rows. It was kind of interesting. He said actually he thought it was easier to harvest that way. But there are a lot of people, this is another one where not exactly a no-brainer, but not a hard one either. This is one of our newest ones. This is durum wheat with faba beans. This was amazing. We had no problems on the wheat whatsoever. Usually we do. And we had no problem on the faba beans. Didn't expect to harvest them together. Really, the faba beans were just there to support the wheat. But it really worked. And I put this website down here, Lana Shaw in the Southeastern Saskatchewan Research Farm. They've been doing a lot of really good work on intercropping, how to do it, what plants go together in more of a wheat system, a small grain system. So this is kind of how it works when they're intercropped. And the only thing you need to really look at is that not all your legumes perform the same. So chickpeas, you really had a lot of nitrogen in the percent. So this is a total percentage, I've got to pull this down, of nitrogen for these plants when they're intercropped with wheat. And if you look at here, and now I have to move something down, the balance, look at chickpeas. This is why I like chickpeas and wheat. They really, on balance, give a lot more nitrogen to the wheat, and you can count on them to do it. Billy beans are your cheapest, or desies. You want to use the desies, not the kabulis, because the desies are wild type. They tend to be not prone as much to ascochyta or fungal diseases. They also form really beautiful mycorrhizal associations. Kabulis are a little bit more variable, and they tend to have a lot more phosphorus. So go for desies, put them in between. they don't get in the way. You'll harvest the wheat. You may not harvest any chickpeas at all, but that doesn't matter. You haven't sprayed a herbicide, you haven't sprayed a fungicide, and you haven't used a whole lot of nitrogen. So cost of production is a lot lower. And I'm stuck. Okay, so this gets us to the last part of this, and you know, which is ultimately it's about consumers. We need to sell our products. We grow food. As farmers, we grow food, and the food needs to be good for people. It can't just be a whole bunch of calories. We need to grow good food, healthy food, food that helps people, because we know that that wheat, more as a whole grain, or oats as a whole grain, barley as a whole grain, but whole grains actually can reduce heart disease, reduce problems with diabetes. They give us a lot of the mineral nutrients we don't normally get. Most people in the United States are short on magnesium and potassium, and whole wheat could certainly provide most of that for you. So in the end here, we know that increasing the organic matter can lead to all these things. We know that root exudates are the key to growing organic matter. They're the key to feeding a rhizosphere. They're the key to a lot of this. So we need to keep the plants in the ground. We need to have green plants as much as possible. Yeah, we're going to lose a little bit over the winter, but we can still, I mean, we have winter wheat. We have winter crops, that winter cover crops we can grow. There's a lot that we can keep in the field so that we always are feeding our microbiome in there. And I'm a director for the Pacific Northwest Direct Seed Association, in charge of the Farm Smart program, which is a certification program for farmers. It was designed by farmers in the Pacific Northwest. And we are working with NORI, which is marketing carbon removal credits. And we've been working with our farmers to add another enterprise, which is adding carbon removal. That requires a little bit more certification. If you're Farm Smart certified, you go straight into the NORI program. This is something I think farmers need to think about. We are part of the solution to climate change. We're part of the solution to water quality. And we should be able to take advantage of that in the long run. We're growing much more nutrient dense food in most cases than we were. We're not going to necessarily get into markets for that right now, but we can hit the carbon market and ecosystem services market. Be careful. Always evaluate your options. Don't sign anything for a long term, because that gets you into a lot of trouble. And this is the end of the next session. So I hope that what we've done is we've sort of put the things together, and now I'm open for questions again. And I'll leave the slides up so that if anybody has a question, I can move to the slides. So if you have a question about a specific slide, I'll try and move there.
I know there are two questions that we didn't have time for, and I see somebody else raising their hand, but we'll have some questions here in the room.
Okay.
How is the carbon nitrogen ratio discovered or calculated?
Mostly it was calculated through changes in respiration. So as we added different materials like into the soil that had different relative amounts of carbon and nitrogen as substrates, we were measuring the amount of respiration of those soils, and the soils went up and down with the amount of nitrogen and that nitrogen carbon balance ratio. People also did a lot of what's called litter bags. They put a lot of litter bags out in the soil, staked them right down onto the soil surface, or buried them just slightly under. And in doing so, measured the rate of decomposition, and based on the quality of the residues that were in there, and then came up with those ratios.
I have a question about, it seems like when I read farm articles and stuff, when talking about soil health, there seems to be two prevailing categories. You're either about yield, you don't care about the soil, or you care about the soil and earthworms and you don't care about the yield. Is it possible to raise 270 bushel corn as a commercial farmer and have healthy soil?
Absolutely. 300 bushel corn and have healthy soil. I don't think that, I don't think there should be a trade-off. Taking care of, once you're taking care of your soil should be synonymous with quality and yield. Absolutely. You know, in these kinds of climate conditions where, you know, it tend to be a lot more variable, building organic matter is just going to serve us in the long run, because either we're going to not drought out or we're not going to be inundated. Either way, we're going to have better soil structure, we're going to have better draining, we're going to have better water holding capacity, and we're just not going to have the problems that we've had with the, you know, with lakes, like with lack of infiltration, and you just get inundated and nothing grows, or you dry out and nothing grows. I mean, the whole idea here is to find the balance so that we are resistant and resilient to, you know, inclement weather, or try and really it's about mitigating risk in the end. I mean, we all, as farmers, we are all taking, we're all accepting a certain amount of risk. And if we can lower our risk, then we can put more money in our pockets. And I don't see that there should be a difference. I mean, some of this is also varietal. We need to keep looking at varieties. And we need to think about things that build the soil at the same time as gives us yield. It's really beautiful that we're seeing more breeders looking at those things now. So no, don't be thinking that you either have one or the other. I mean, I'm all about you have both. I want more for less is really what amounts to. And I'm getting that. I mean, I think, well, I know I'm building my soils, but at the same time, I haven't compromised yields. I still have better than average yields in the county, and I have really good soil health. So I don't see them as being mutually exclusive.
Jill, I have a question for you, kind of based on travels around the world. We have a kind of a slogan here that we hear a lot of, and that is we need to produce more to feed the world. What do you think of that idea?
Actually, I showed you some information from Jim Robb. Jim Robb made some calculations one day. He was kind of asked this, thinking about the same question. And he said, so he said, okay, this is how many people we have in the world right now. And so let's say I fed somebody 2 pounds of corn a day for a whole year, every man, woman, and child in the world right now. You could do that for a whole year, 2 pounds a day for everybody in the world from one county in Kansas. Are we short of food? No. We short on yield? No. What we are short on is political will. And when you get into countries where people are really hungry, most of it is, if you want to control your population, if you want to control the people in there, what do? You starve them. You starve them, and you give, and they're already struggling for water. So it's pretty easy to control your population by starving them. So food security is an important thing. And the other thing is, why not give them really poor quality food so they can't think? I mean, that also works. So my own feeling is, having traveled around the world and worked in the poorest countries in the world, we can produce enough food. We can't distribute it. A lot of times it sits there. I watched in Kenya while the government came in and plowed down a field because somebody was using no-till, and they decided that, I don't know, they were in the wrong tribe or whatever, and that they thought they should just plow it for them. So, you know, sometimes you have to be boots on the ground to start really understanding famine. And sometimes famine is really real because of climate, and sometimes it is completely politically induced. Um, and we have to find that balance. We really do. We are producing ample food, like, you know, and I hear young people now, even in this country, say to me, well, you know, I'm really worried we're going to run out of food. We are not going to run out of food. We are not going to run out of food. The farmers in North America can grow food so well. We can feed every man, woman, and child in this country, no matter what. And I believe that with all my heart. And I believe that we could probably feed the rest of the world as well, even if we did nothing new. So most of this is about taking care of ourselves. And now that we know we can do that, let's make food that's really good for us. Let's take care of our environment so that we can keep going for the rest of the rest of the generations to come. Let's look after our world a little bit more and show people what can really be done. But this is, food and politics go hand in hand. I mean, they do. And so don't get caught up in that. Try not to get caught up in that. We're feeding everybody just fine. And the other thing is I hear politicians say all the time, well, you know, the way we're going to feed everybody is we have to make food cheaper. No, not at all. I mean, if you want us to grow really high quality food as farmers, then you need to pay for it. And, you know, maybe it's about time. I mean, I like football just as much as everybody else, but maybe I could spend a little bit more on food, and maybe my entertainment budget could go down just a little bit. And maybe we just need to have our priorities shifted just a little bit, but I need to keep making money. And a subsidized system isn't the way to keep farmers on the land and keep doing things well. It's about private enterprise and you know, paying us for what we grow. And when we grow really food that's really nutrient dense, we should get paid more. Because you don't need to eat as much of it because it's really good for you. So I'm sorry, I stand on a soapbox on that one, but I just don't believe. I think we solve the politics first, and then it's going to be easy to distribute the food.
Another question, certainly agree with what you're saying from my travels. I've seen this too. You get politics out of the way, we could feed multiple times the number of population we have on Earth today. But my question is related to interseeding into corn, B4 stage. When we do that, is it better to focus on crops that are kind of an interseeded, grow along with the corn? Or is it better trying to have something that then grows over the winter when there isn't any other crop out on the field?
Oh, you can, I mean, yeah, that is something that I think we wanted to find a balance, and that's what we've been working on, is how can we find that balance? So we are, we have in our intercrops or our underseeding, we have ones that will overwinter and ones that are really going to work really well in season. So the pigeon peas are going to work really well in season with the corn, but they're not going to overwinter. But if I underseed that, if I have in a mix there some, you know, spring peas and some other things, and even some brassicas, they'll grow up after I take the corn off. And the pigeon peas will die down too. So it's really about, you know, each farm ecosystem is completely different, and one size fits no one. Some people don't want to see anything on the fields, you know, in the winter. And so, you know, they want things to die. If you're really worried about herbicides, and some people are, then having things die over the winter is a really good thing, because then I don't need to use a herbicide. And I've controlled the weeds and I have enough residue. Or in my case, when I've got integrated livestock grazing, I need to have things that after I take off my milo, I've got things coming up through, so that I have things to graze, and that works into my system. So I'm working on both sides of it. I know with people who are cropping, we also need to keep the ground covered. So maybe we're going to grow slightly different things than we would in the case of when we have integrated livestock. And we're going to be thinking about our next crop and not carrying over diseases or trying to deal with the diseases that they might have. And making sure that in our intercropping or our companion cropping, we're not carrying over diseases too. There's a lot to consider. I mean, this isn't something you just kind of wing. You need to spend a little bit of time looking at crossover diseases. What can I have in there? What can I take to the next step?
My question has to do with, it's a little bit related to the one that you just got previous. There's been a little bit of thought to possibly growing some 60-inch row wide corn. And then we're so heavily herbicide dependent for weed control. Planting another crop in between those corn rows to gain weed control. And what kind of possibilities are there for that? Are there plant species that are more likely to work, or what's your opinion?
One of the things to think about, I think I'm trying to think of where you would find this. I think it's on Dawn Equipment, they have it, but I'm not sure. There's been people who have been experimenting with seeding corn into perennial alfalfa. And so rolling it down, seeding it in, and then letting the alfalfa grow up, using an in-between the row roller in between times. And the corn crop has been amazing. And you just end up with a carpet of alfalfa underneath the corn. It's phenomenal. Takes a little bit of extra equipment, takes it a little extra thought. Clover works really well in that case. Crimson clover can be, and a clover mix can be outstanding in that situation where you actually seed it ahead of time and then seed your corn into it. Same with vetch. You can seed your corn right into it and take it down a notch. If you want to use chemicals, you can use a light burn down, just not kill it, but just take it down a notch. Seed your corn first, then take it down a notch, and then let your corn come up through, and you'll have this beautiful mulch, living mulch underneath your corn crop. There are a lot of opportunities, and there's a lot of people working on this, and I think you'll find you start looking on Facebook and looking around on social media, you'll find there's a number of farmers that are having a go at all this.